Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be tuning in from. Welcome, and this is going to be a very exciting live and interactive session here, hosted by Salterbaxter, the leading sustainability communications consultancy, serving brands and companies around the world. My name's Tom Idle. I'm the editor-in-chief at 2 Degrees, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour as we discuss a fascinating subject around how brands use social media for sustainability. So first of all, I thought we'd kick off with a few facts about the sheer popularity of social media. Did you know every minute 1.8 million Facebook likes are made? That's every minute. Every second, at least 10 tweets are made containing the words Starbucks. YouTube reaches more adults in the US than any of their cable networks. In the minute since I started talking, 120 new members have joined LinkedIn. And social media has overtaken porn as the #1 activity on the web. I'm not entirely sure that last fact is true, but you get the picture. Social media is huge. It's part of our everyday, what we do every day. If you're anything like me, you check in with friends on Facebook before you go to bed at night on your phone. You wake up the next morning, you check Twitter for the news. It's part of what we do. And 25% of smartphone users aged 18 to 44 say they can't remember the last time their smartphone was not within reach of them. Fascinating, really. So social media has become this incredibly popular, powerful tool. More and more brands are using it to really reach their consumers, and you can see why. The Facebook fan base of Dell is the same size as the population of Singapore. So more and more companies are seeing social media as a way of not just selling products and services and telling people about their company news, but really starting to talk about the issues that are actually important to them. So lots of issues that fall under this banner of sustainability. But doing it well and doing it with purpose is easier said than done. And you can have a huge following across social media and you can throw lots of money at it, but that doesn't really guarantee that you'll engage properly with that audience you're trying to reach. And that's exactly what we're going to be discussing in today's session. How do you really nail social media when it comes to sustainability storytelling? And how do you make sure that what you're doing adds value to your organization? And of course, the context to all this conversation is the great work that the team at Salterbaxter have been doing in a rather exhaustive piece of research and analysis that has led to the very first SB Influencers 100 Index, which is essentially a league table of the top 100 companies that are really having an influence and really engaging that audience on social. It's the first study of its kind that's really using data to kind of quantify that success. So in the next hour, we're going to find out a bit more about that research. And then we're going to hear from 4 companies that have actually made the top 10 of this index. And then really it's over to you. We want to hear from you, we want your questions, and to get engaged in a conversation, two-way conversation. So we'll get started. I'm going to introduce you first to our panel. So here in central London, we're joined by Madeleine Lewis, who is a storyteller for Virgin Unite. We're also joined on the end by John B., who is the communications manager for Nestlé. We are joined in New York on the line from GE, Nathan Strauss, who is the digital communications manager.
There's Nathan.
There's Nathan, sorry,
Hi,
yes.
Nathan.
And lastly, we're joined by Mary Bradburn, who is the corporate global social lead for Cisco, and she's joining us from Seattle. Hello, Mary.
Hi.
So each of our panelists are going to have 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes, and we really want them to stick to their allotted 5 minutes to give us some insight into how they're using social and how they've managed to get into that top 10. And then we're going to get some Q&A going. So you can submit questions at any time you like. Our preference is that you use Twitter. So please do use the hashtag SBI100, which is above my head. Fire your questions using Twitter, please. You can use email. You can email digital@salterbaxter.com if you like. You can also use the Q&A function within the platform that you're actually watching us on now. Our preference is Twitter, so please do use that. But first, I'm going to hand you over to Gemma. Gemma heads up Salterbaxter's consultancy department here. And Gemma's going to really introduce the study and give us some insight into the key findings. Gemma.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I can see a big number of you are logged in and joining this webinar today, so big warm welcome to you all. I thought I'd start by just talking about why we did this study in the first place. We work with businesses all around the world, helping them with their social media efforts, in particular the social media efforts designed for talking about sustainability issues and engaging audiences around sustainability topics. And whatever we're doing with our clients, whether it's doing social listening for sustainability issues, creating strategies, content plans, engaging influencer communities, we're always coming up with the same questions that come from the businesses and brands that we work with. First of all, we're regularly being asked, how can we demonstrate the value for using social when engaging communities around sustainability topics? And then also the businesses and brands we work with also ask, how can we measure whether or not we're being effective versus our competitors or our peers operating in the same space? So while a lot of the clients we work with know instinctively that they're getting lots of value from their efforts, they kind of want a bit more evidence and a bit more data and rigor behind answering those questions and communicating that internally with their peers within the business. So that's what this study really was designed to do, was to prove the value and help answer some of those questions. Before I kind of go on, I thought it's useful as well just to define exactly what we mean by sustainability. This is a study looking at how effective businesses can be when engaging audiences around sustainability. What do we actually mean by that as a term? I know when I first started working in this space, I stumbled across the term a lot and would kind of want to redefine it in my mind with each project that I would work on. Broadly, when we're talking about sustainability, we mean any instant where a business is considering the long-term impact and role that they play within society. So that might include instances where a business is looking really outwardly and looking at their role in context of really big global challenges such as health, poverty, economic development, climate change, human rights, and so on. But we're also capturing instances where businesses are looking more introspectively and looking at the impact that they have on environment and people, such as looking at how they're researching, developing their products and services, how those products and services are being manufactured, the kind of core raw ingredients that they're using, and the role that those products and services have in people's lives. So the subject's big, it's vast, and we've deliberately kept it so that we can really capture any instance where a business or brand online is talking about these different topics across social, rather than measuring other uses for social like marketing and PR and brand. So a bit more about the project. It's been a big epic project, as Tom said. It's been 9 months in the making. We've had a powerhouse of consultants and analysts working behind the scenes, counting thousands, hundreds of thousands of data sets to bring about this study. For every business or brand that we've measured, we've looked at their entire social presence designed to talking just about sustainability, and we've looked at just the activity that is about that topic. And then what we really wanted to do was quantify influence. So we've done it in 3 ways. First, we've looked at the volume of activity that these businesses and brands are putting out about sustainability. Second, we're looking at the size of the audience that activity is reaching. And then third, we're looking at the actual engagement that activity is getting. And the third point is key, because we couldn't prove that a business was being impactful and effective unless we could see in the data the content they were sharing was being passed on, retweeted, shared. So that was really important. But for a business to feature highly in the study, they had to have a blend of all 3 metrics. So we've collected a whole host of data to produce this table, and it's actually going to appear on your screens now so you can see it. You'll be able to browse the actual table and the analysis that sits behind it at your own leisure, and you can see you can interact with some of the brands that feature on it and look at some of the studies behind it. But today is really about us talking about what we've learned from this study and using an opportunity to talk with the panel about some of our findings. What I found really interesting was that of all the businesses that topped the study, there wasn't actually a single winning strategy behind success. And actually, if you looked at all of the techniques that the different businesses and brands were using, they were hugely different from each other. What the businesses did have in common that were doing really well was that they had effort and resource behind their activity. Success didn't just happen, they really put some effort into that, and that they would have sort of a strategy and considerations behind that. The other thing that we noticed, which was interesting, was that the businesses that tended to perform better were using social in a very dedicated way. So rather than integrating sustainability as a topic amongst other Twitter handles and Facebook pages, they were having standalone handles dedicated for that topic. But finally, what this study's really proven is the absolute value that businesses and brands are getting from using social media for sustainability communications. And what we thought was really interesting was that different businesses and brands are defining value in different ways, and we're going to hear about some of that today. Nathan's going to talk a little bit about how they're defining value in a more of a kind of ROI measures used to kind of define increase in share of voice and increase in reputation. Madeleine, I know you're going to talk about the value that you get in social acting as a kind of agent of change within the business. So we gained an enormous amount from the study. We're really excited by all the data that we have, and I'm now going to hand over to the panel to talk more about their perspectives on the value and role that it brings to them.
Lovely, thank you, Gemma. That's really good scene setting as we go into our panel. Let's kick off with you, Madeleine. I know you use social as a way of really trying to build dialogue with those consumers. So why don't you give us some insight on what you've been up to?
Yep, so thank you very much for inviting us here. We're delighted to be here. So I just want to say a bit about Virgin and Virgin Unite and how we work, and a bit about me as well, and our approach to social media and storytelling. So the Virgin Group's purpose is to change business for good, and we have a dedicated content stream and associated social media activity which is dedicated to sustainability, environmental and social issues, and that's driven by our non-profit foundation, Virgin Unite. And Unite was set up 10 years ago by Richard Branson and the current CEO, Jean Olawang, to unite people with entrepreneurial ideas that could make our world a better place. Unite does this in three ways. The first one is most important for this conversation. It's about shining a spotlight on unacceptable issues and great entrepreneurial approaches. It also does a whole host of other things. So we're involved in setting up the B Team, the Carbon War Room. We support entrepreneurs in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Liberia, and the Caribbean. And we advocate for across a whole range of issues, from gay rights to stopping shark finning. And just to give a bit of context to where I came from and how I set up our platform, I came to Unite with a background in sustainability and communications. I'd been in journalism at the BBC, I'd done a master's in sustainability, and then went on to work at Forum for the Future, which is one of the leading global NGOs. And yet in all that experience, as I learned more and more about sustainability, I realised that even though these ideas I think are some of the most exciting of our times and can genuinely change the lives of billions of people, yet the conversations we were having about them felt to be niche, often very technical, and often taking place in an echo chamber. And there's a famous expression which is, don't hate the media, be the media. And as we know, the digital revolution has given us the opportunity to create our own platforms and share stories, and it's democratized information. So that's when I came to join Virgin Unite. Now, collectively, Unite, Virgin, and Richard Branson have a reach of about 25 million across all social channels, and that's on top of an incredible network of partners and friends across the world. And that is essentially an incredible platform for change, and that's how we think about it. In terms of how we work on social media, it's very much driven by our web content. We act and think like a publisher. So we post on sustainability and environmental and social issues alone, we publish at least 2 pieces of content every day. And all these stories are amplified across our network. So from Unite to Virgin to Richard Branson to our partners to our network. And we believe also that no one organisation can achieve significant change alone. So our approach is very much not just about having a channel to talk about our brand's activities on sustainability. It's very much about sharing that with other innovators in the field, whether or not they're connected with Virgin and the work that we do. So you might have on any one day on our platform, on our virgin.com, you might have a story about Virgin's Sustainable Jet Fuels initiative, or something about the entrepreneurs we're supporting in Liberia. But equally, you'll have a story about someone, an innovative conservation organisation using drones to stop poaching of rhinos in South Africa, or a startup that's recycling flies. And we see them as just as important as one another, and they mutually reinforce one another. And I think for us that's really important, because it makes, as I say, because we think like a publisher, we want to make this really interesting for our audience, and they really respond to that variety and breadth of content. The other thing I think that makes us different, and you spoke to this, which is that we take a storytelling approach. So we're all about blending emotion with facts, humour with gravity, and bringing that unique virgin tone and positive perspective rather than the doom and gloom that we often hear quite a lot about. And storytelling teaches us that you're not going to reach people through rational arguments and facts alone. And whilst we want them on our platform, it's also about appealing to the emotional connection, which Virgin does very well. So our goal ultimately is to continually share stories about all the incredible people around the world that are doing amazing things to make the world a better place for everyone. And by doing so, we want to inspire others and empower others to join in that change. And for us, this is a relatively new area for us. I set up the operation about 18 months ago, but it seems to be working. We've had an increase of 68% in unique visitors, 78% in page views, and our social channels are up to 74%. So I think it's possibly quite different to other approaches that the other members of the panel are going to talk about, but it's working for us.
Great, thank you, Madeleine. Let's go straight on to John.
Thank you. So, Tom, I'd like to open a little bit with describing what we mean by creating shared value.
Okay.
Basically, it's looking to deliver mutual benefits for our shareholders by bringing business solutions to bear on specific societal issues. Now, for us, we know we need to concentrate on where we do that most scalably and best. And we've concluded that that is basically in the areas of nutrition, water, and rural development. Now, that doesn't mean we don't cover other, responsibilities that we have specifically on environmental and social sustainability, looking after our own people, meeting our commitments to human rights, and obviously compliance. We've been reporting on these topics for some years now. What we've been doing differently over the past 2 or 3 is we've been systematically engaging with stakeholders both on and offline. And that's led us to a certain number of conclusions. Notably that they expect us to take leadership positions. We're the biggest in our industry. They expect us to act like it. And that's why what you will see in our current Creating Shared Value report published on Tuesday is 38 forward-looking time-bound commitments that we hold ourselves accountable for. So I think that one of the other things is what we're increasingly doing is admitting we don't have all the answers. So that's why another reason behind why we engage so proactively, online and offline, once again, through our Creating Shared Value Forum. I think, Gemma, you mentioned that in your analysis of us, which is one of the high points in which we use as sort of a focal point to engage in social media. And it's also where we partner. Again, I think in your analysis of us, you mentioned our relationship with the International Federation of Red Cross. If you have a powerful partner that's also very active in social, that very much helps you to deliver good conversations in these spaces, in the sustainability space, as it were. But I would come back to the fact that I think that it's the solidity of our content which is really at the base of that. I'm not a social media specialist. I look after the overall communications effort behind Creating Shared Value. We do have dedicated social media experts both in our headquarters in Switzerland and in our 80+ offices around the world who help us amplify and work very hard on that conversation. But they start as well from the content. They start by posting content that they think resonates with the followers. As you said, I think we have about 27,000 on our dedicated Creating Shared Value Twitter feed. The corporate Nestlé one is over 60,000, I think. And we want the content to have a value. We try to make the content catchy, surely. You have to do that in this particular medium. You making it visually appealing as well. Because, well, after all, we're competing in an age of clickbait, aren't we? So we try to be inspired, but we really don't copy the style of new media sites like BuzzFeed. We make sure that the tone, however, is still, quite sober, appropriate to us as an organisation. And we try very hard to make the 140 characters on the Twitter in particular enticing enough for readers to click and learn more. but be careful not to overpromise. So we don't think that our followers like to be disappointed by going to a page that doesn't deliver what they thought they were going to get, and we're wasting our followers' time that way. We do use tailored infographics, but the top line information is right there in the tweet. Okay, you don't have to click through if you don't want to go any further than that. We do focus, as I think you identified, around some key, creating shared value events during the year. The publication of our report in March each year is one of those points. And also, over the past 6 years, we've run a Creating Shared Value Global Forum of moderated discussion panels of leading experts, Professor Michael Porter, people of that sort of caliber. We bring them all together and we put them on the spot. We don't let them use PowerPoints. We do what you're doing to me today. And we ask them to sort of tell the world what they think are the keys to solving these problems in nutrition, water, rural development, the role of business in society. But we also invite viewers, followers from around the world. And what's interesting, I just dug up some figures from our CSV Fora over the years. In 2012, we held one in New Delhi. This is a population of 1.1 billion that you could potentially get at. We had 3,200 posts on Twitter. Then we went to Cartagena in Colombia, 58 million people to draw from. We went up to 5,700, and then we were in Lausanne, Switzerland last October, 7 million people to draw from. Well, obviously, that's a bit of an overgeneralization because we are drawing people from far beyond the borders of where we hold the thing, but I think it's illustrative nonetheless. And you're getting up to nearly 6,000 interactions. And again, driven largely by some of those interactions with our partners, the International Federation of the Red Cross. When they have a big event, they share their tweet material with us so that we can amplify it over our channels. These are some of the strategies we've been using. So I'll stop there because I'm way over my 5 minutes.
Clearly doing something right, John, to be topping that list. So thank you for that. Why don't we now go over to Seattle and join Mary Bradburn. Mary?
Hi, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody on the call. I appreciate your allowing me to be here. To set context for Cisco, we're a B2B company, $50 billion and 70,000 people help make all of that happen. We are an IT company, and so while you're hearing from Nestlé and Virgin, they're very consumer focused, we have a completely different audience, and which can make it a little tricky and set context for the conversation. With Cisco, one of the things that's really important that we do for our audiences, customers, partners, and influencers, is to help them understand where the industry is going, and also to inspire innovation and help people understand how technology can make a difference in this world. Because if you're just talking, if you're just talking routers, it's very boring and it's not inspiring. So that you also understand, like Cisco social media, I think to set that context is important for this conversation. We have two groups. One is social media communications, and that's where I lead, and then social media marketing. Our marketing partners focus on customers and partners exclusively, and so their revenue generation. We are focused on that thought leadership piece, and our influencer, our audiences are, traditional PR like media, analysts, and Wall Street, as well as social media influencers. And if we sell to those audiences, they become very suspicious of us. So for us, it's really important that we're creating messaging and content that, again, is inspirational. So to do that, we have a what we call large brand journalism presence. And if you were to go, for example, to newsroom.cisco.com, you'll find our website, which is indeed our newsroom, where you can get all of our press releases. But we have a vast number of very high-level journalists, people who have written for Wall Street Journal, or for us, a popular, some of the more popular publications, Business Week and even Network World. If they have written for them in the past, so they've got a lot of credibility in our industry. And we ask them to write pieces about where the industry is going, but they are not required to write anything about Cisco at all. Our qualifications are: don't help a competitor, don't hurt Cisco. And what that allows the industry to do then is to get a sense for where the industry is going and where the conversations are going. At Cisco, we also have a group that's specifically focused on corporate social responsibility. And that's the group that actually goes in and helps, with technology, helps to build the wells, helps to drive STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math in the schools. Excuse me. And so we partner very closely with them. What we do find with that brand journalism is that it has become a very award-winning both site and just content alone. We also have an e-magazine that we're finding has created a tremendous amount of engagement with our influencers. So we can talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to set the stage for what we're doing there as we go forward in the conversation. The big things that we focus on, obviously, I think with anybody with a good communications and social media plan, is that we care mostly about what our influencers, we want to make sure we aren't selling to them, but that we're giving them content that they care about, content that they want to comment on, and content that they want to share on their respective channels. So with that, I'll leave it as a start and move forward in the conversations as we go through our questions.
Thank you very much, Mary. That's great. Just as a quick reminder, we've got some fantastic questions coming in, but please do keep tweeting us your questions. And as I say, after we've heard from Nathan at GE, we're going to go through those questions and try and answer as many as we can. So let's do that. Let's go to New York. Let's hear from Nathan Strauss from GE, who I know has been doing a lot trying to measure that return on investment of your social activity. Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom, and I'm grateful to be here. So just by way of introduction, I lead digital communications for GE. So based in our corporate offices here in 30 Rock in New York City. So as part of that role, I help with drive communications for our Eco-Imagination initiative, which actually was launched about 10 years ago next month. So back in 2005, when Eco-Imagination came about, it was one of the first sort of corporate sustainability programs of its kind, and that we sort of boldly pronounced that green is green, and that this was not a traditional CSR philanthropic initiative, but it was a revenue-generating business strategy for us, and in the course of 10 years has meant about $200 billion in revenue for the company. So a little bit of a different take than I think some of our other panelists, although GE as a company is certainly engaged in foundation and philanthropic initiatives as well. So in addition to Eco, I also manage, Tom, as you mentioned, research, metrics, measurements as it relates to the company's reputation. So all things from traditional and social media listening and analysis to weekly, quarterly takes on how we're trending, and then corporate reputation polling in about 16 countries. So that helps inform, I think, a little bit about how we measure the ROI of social media for sustainability. And then finally, as a content strategy leader, I think like the other panelists, GE sees itself as a media company to some degree, as a publisher, and we're producing content on a daily basis. Much like Virgin and Cisco and Nestlé. So with that, I'm helping our communicators sort of advise on distribution, how best to reach the right audiences via paid, earned, owned, and social content. So, I mean, maybe I can dive into that a little bit just as it relates to ROI. So, I think social media is an incredible vehicle for reaching a specific audience. So I think too often we jump into developing content or trying to come up with the next cool and catchy headline or tweet or infographic without thinking about sort of specifically who we're trying to reach. So in determining a specific audience and call to action, we can use social to micro-target, right down to likes and interests and demographics, down to who people follow. And then once that's determined, I think the next step is channel. We, at GE is all about embracing new platforms. So the channels are our usual social media suspects, as everyone knows, and folks are engaging with this panel on Twitter as we speak. But we're finding great success on Snapchat. We're experimenting with Meerkat, as we did last week at South by Southwest. I'm sort of a firm believer in brands should never be afraid of the latest and greatest platform. And if it goes away, so be it. We step back. And then the form of content, long form editorial. GE Reports is our company magazine, and we love long form storytelling. we're also doing more and more, visual, whether that's static infographics or interactive video. But I think even on Twitter, as most of our panelists know, 140 characters alone doesn't suffice. Every social media platform is a visual platform in some way. And then distribution, I think for us and for sort of communicators or PR folks by nature, it can be a hard thing to stomach, but I try to help folks understand that I think social media is no longer a free or organic platform. It's really in many ways an advertising vehicle. Facebook in particular has made it so that your organic reach is almost nothing. You have to pay to play to be seen in some way. So I think it's helpful to understand that doesn't mean huge investments of money, but there are targeted ways to spend and do promoted amplification of your posts. I think it's important to think about. And in addition to that, there's of course other things like search and syndication services like Taboola and Outbrain and others that are really important paid means for getting out your message. So unless you're Richard Branson and have an organic reach, of 25 million, as Madeleine said, as a brand, you've got to pay to play to some degree, and that's hard to get comfortable with, but I think it's something we need to do. And then I'm coming up on time, so last but not least, measuring the effectiveness of content and the audience's reach. So, we look at the usual metrics like engagements, impressions, likes, comments, shares, video views, cost per view, cost per engagement. I think getting the ROI is really interesting. It's possible to see what it costs to acquire one reader, or really even what it costs to have one reader spend 1 minute with your content. You could break it down by individual and by amount of time. So it's amazing what you can do with metrics on social. But in addition to those real-time metrics, which can sort of inundate you with numbers, I think it's important to look at longer-term trends and in your share of voice, you versus competitors on share and volume of conversation and tone and how that's trending, your peaks and troughs over time. And then rolling that up and wrapping it into larger things like I mentioned in polling. I think we find that sustainability, social media can be a source of information for people that inevitably impact positively and influence their perception of our brand in a favorable light. So I think with a targeted and thoughtful, methodic approach to social media sustainability, it's possible to measure very effectively and show how this content is reaching people and changing their minds and improving the reputation of a brand.
Great.
So I'll leave it there, Tom. Sorry to run over a little bit.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I noticed your Starbucks cup there as well. I couldn't help but notice that. I suspect someone will be tweeting about that in due course, no doubt. But fascinating initial insights from all of you. Thank you for that. Interesting, having spent a career in publishing, that all these brands now see themselves as publishers and all that entails. So it's very interesting. We had some great questions come in. So what we'll do, we'll get straight into the Q&A. The first question we've had that's come in, which is a very interesting one, and I wonder whether all of our panelists would answer this. What kind of resources, and this is something that Nathan you've been touching on here, what kind of resources and effort should you actually put behind your social media handles? What does it actually take to get to that top of that index? Maybe Mary, do you want to kick off?
Sure. I think to start with, it depends on what your objectives are and how the size of your company and your resources. So it's great to have the following, but it's actually more important to have the engagement with your key audiences. So if you're a very niche company, it doesn't matter that you have 1 million followers on Twitter if it's like my mother and my father, because they may not be buying what you're selling. So I would focus more on the engagement with who you want to be your customer or follower or your influencer, more so than the actual number of influencers. But that said, I also want to say that you've got your customers, your partners. If you have those influencers, make sure that you know who they are influencing, and making sure that you've covered all your bases there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. John, what about you?
Yeah, so we established a dedicated Twitter handle at Nestlé CSV. That channel's got 23,000 followers. That's where we talk about creating shared value. And we think it's important to engage people in a space where they're particularly interested in the topic. We have a much bigger corporate handle. Those people are often on there looking for the latest Kit Kat recipe, or they're looking for financial results. So we want to concentrate on where people are most comfortable to talk about these topics, and that's what we've done there. And in terms of the resources that we put behind this, the corporate social media channels, they're managed by 2 members of our corporate comms staff, and their responsibility is to create content and engage with visitors on corporate issues. Now, their know-how's in social media.
Right.
What sits behind them is 70, 80, 90 specialists in, water management, in agricultural, supply chains, in human rights, all those people they can call on to develop meaningful content for this very engaged audience. And I think that's what we learned about this particular space. These are people who want to have a conversation. They don't just want to dip in and out. They want to have a proper conversation about some really important issues that trouble them.
Yeah. So your social effort has been really embedded into the wider team.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We don't think a conversation on these topics can happen, independently of involving social.
Sure. And Madeleine, you mentioned 2 stories a day.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the resource? What will you put behind this?
Yeah, so obviously, as I said, our social is very much driven by our content, which is largely published on Virgin.com. So we have about, I think, 7 people producing content and looking after social, who are permanently sitting at Virgin HQ. We've then got more people working on analysis, rich content design. Then we work with pools of freelancers. But just like John was saying, actually, it's really important, I think, in whatever size of organisation you're in, to use that pool of experts and other specialists that you have who know a huge amount of depth and have a huge amount of insight into the topics and a passion for it. So it's about really leveraging that as well, and we do that right across the organisation. Of course, there are lots of people involved in content production and social media right across the Virgin Group, and so our job as well is to work directly with them and bring content out of Virgin Australia or wherever it is and amplify that. So it is quite, in our case, it is quite a large investment, and on top you've got as Nathan was saying, it's about investing also in promotion and paid. We invest in paid. We have got Richard Branson, but we do invest in paid stuff too. So yes, it is quite an investment, and that would be fitting for a business of our scale. But I think there are principles you can take from that, however big the organisation is actually.
Okay. And Gemma, what's your experience working with brands over the years? What do they need to put in?
In our experience, the more effort they put in, the more they get back, and we really do find that. And a lot of the businesses that we work with just don't have the people internally to be able to do all of this in-house. So they work with us to really help bolster up those teams, define sort of content strategies, approaches, and then we work closely with teams that sit within businesses and help kind of complement their efforts. So when we do find that reward just does tend to really pay off, and the more kind of effort they put in, it does work, as we're hearing sort of from you.
Yeah, sure. And what about you, Nathan?
No, I would just echo Gemma and Madeleine's point, which is that it's a considerable investment. It's an investment in the content itself. On the communication side, we have storytelling. I have a full-time journalist on staff who's really reporting and digging stories and interviewing subjects on a daily basis for GE reports. And then on the marketing side, we have content being produced every day that's largely visual, GIFs, video, media partnerships. It's a considerable investment. And then as Madeleine said, there's the paid amplification that goes on top of that. So we're a little bit leaner. As Gemma said, we're leaner within. There's only a handful of folks here on our floor, but rely many on our agency partners to help us along the way.
Okay. Let's move on. Dave Cole. Sorry, Mary,
Tom, I just wanted to jump in. Well, I was just going to say it's actually a relief to hear that from such other large companies that you're experiencing the same thing, because we too at Cisco have this really small core group of people, 4 people, 2 people creating content, 2 managing the social handles, and then the back end, we've got an agency that helps us and people running metrics. But it's amazing for such a large company to have such a small core, small but mighty group managing such an it's an enormous responsibility when you've got the corporate handles. So it's a bit of a relief to hear that we're in good company.
Yeah, and that is the experience that we have with a lot of big businesses with kind of global footprints, is that they need to rely on agencies, because agencies have the scale of tools and technology to really help kind of listen to the kind of social conversations and give them a bit more of a kind of defined approach. So we do find that with a lot of the businesses we work, the kind of small teams internally.
Okay, let's move on. Dave Carlos on Twitter makes a good point. He says that in the index, B2B companies actually lag behind B2C. in using social generally, and less on sustainability. What are the top tips for B2B, especially the property sector, Dave asks. I wonder, Mary, do you have a view on that?
Sure.
Is it fundamentally different between B2B and B2C?
Yeah, I think so. So, for example, if you take a look at Microsoft, who with Cisco is, we are in cooperation with Microsoft. There are things that we are partnering very closely with them, and there are areas where we compete with them. But Microsoft has a very large B2C audience. And so you've got these people who are just passionate about Microsoft products, but they don't know any of the B2B products. Cisco is only B2B, and so it makes it a little bit more difficult to have an enormous following. So, for example, our Twitter presence, we're just under 500K, Instagram 13K because we just started it, Facebook 700K. But you contrast that with a Nestlé, Virgin, or a GE, and then you have, it's dwarfed by B2C. So I think that it gets back to, again, what everybody has just talked about. It's that engagement, the content, whether it's social content or it's content that's living on whatever your newsroom site is called. I think that's the most important piece of it, is what you're creating that your audience most cares about. So we have a smaller audience. Clearly, we have a smaller audience because we focus on the CXO and the CIO and the mid-level management who's in IT. That's a small niche group of people. But it's okay as long as we have that content that engages them and helps them to understand where the industry is going and what Cisco can do for them.
Okay. Another question is coming.
Tom, I could probably just add something to that, Tom. We get this question a lot about around B2B versus B2C, just as a GE and as the legacy that we have. I mean, with the sale of the appliances business last year, GE is a purely B2B company now. So it's counterintuitive that we would be doing as much sort of consumer-facing marketing as we do on social media and on these new platforms that I mentioned, Snapchat earlier. But I think we see consumer engagement with our brand as a good thing, whether we're engaging with future employees or future investors or potential customers. I think sometimes the B2B audience, while specific audiences that are going to buy your product are important, you have to remember that even the wonkiest or nerdiest technophile or hardcore finance person is ultimately a person to a consumer who's gonna fun and interesting content on a simple level is gonna resonate with them and give them sort of a better affinity for your brand. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I apologize for calling you B2C. To that point, Nathan, some of the best content that we have put out that receives the most engagement are funny and funky and relevant graphics. So, for example, on May 4th, which is Star Wars Day, we used a cable and drew an outline of Yoda and said, "May the 4th be with you." That has actually received some of the most and best engagement, and so it's gone crazy viral. So it's both what general people care about. They may not even know that it's a cable, but also what our audience cares about. So I just want to reinforce what Nathan said, and just it's that engagement. And yeah, they're people. I mean, we have a very significantly large male audience because of where we play in the industry, and they're the dads, and they love Star Wars. So it's that engagement. Yeah.
What about, we've got another question here about real-time listening. I wonder if any of our panelists actually do any real-time listening, actually having proper conversations rather than just content streaming. Does anyone have any experience of storytelling? Nathan, do you want to go?
Tom, yeah, sure, I can start. I take listening very seriously. So we do real-time community management, through an agency, VaynerMedia, who manages many of our handles, and they have people dedicated to these channels, every day during business hours, and they're engaging with people who comment. They are liking and following and sort of developing and curating an audience and growing the community. I think that's the only way to do it. I think social media, you can't just sort of push one way and then be deaf and blind when it comes to feedback. You have to engage, and that goes for the good things that are coming on your channel as well as the bad. So we also engage on issues when people complain about the company or about our policies or about incidents or issues that may have happened in the past, we will respond and engage with those folks too, as long as there's a genuine intent there. So I think real-time community management is important, as well as real-time listening and reporting on just what's being said, not just on your own channels, but in the greater social media universe about the brand, and we report that on a daily basis as well.
Great. Okay. And Gemma, did that the value of that real-time listening come through in the index in any way, or what's the insight there?
Well, we have, through kind of talking with the different businesses and brands, uncovered the ones that are doing that behind the scenes, because you can't sort of see that from Twitter as such and from the kind of content that people are pushing out. But it seems that the businesses and brands that are doing listening and are kind of deploying those techniques are succeeding more. And it's something that we do a lot with our clients. You know, we have tools to allow us to listen to conversations happening around different sustainability issues, and then report on that, and then allow businesses to really then react to that as part of their kind of content planning, and be much more reactive to real conversations. And often we find when we run these reports, you know, businesses will have a really good steer on what communities are interested in, but they will learn quite a lot from listening to those community conversations, and they will learn things that are surprising, and they'll learn things that are a little bit different. So while that listening will often reinforce what they know, it will also add new dimensions to the way in which they can talk and topics they can kind of prioritise on and focus on. So it is really, really valuable, I think, a really valuable technique to kind of put into place. Okay, great.
Let's get through a few more of these questions. Another one here from Delphine Reynaud. Maybe John, this is one for you to answer, but Delphine wonders how you are working with influencers across social media to really sort of amplify your message and leverage the power of these influencers. Well, I guess.
I guess we're kind of fortunate when we hold our Creating Shared Value Fora in particular, that we do have a fair few influencers actually in the room with us. I mean, typically we've got people like John Elkington, who's an avid, you know, Twitter user, and he's always on one of our panels, and so he kind of amplifies a lot of this specialist content as it's produced. Michael Porter, same thing, of Harvard University.
Yep.
And then, you know, Secretary General of the Red Cross, and in our last two we've had, you know, state presidents. So we had the president of Switzerland and the president of Colombia in the last two. So, you know, they tend to generate conversation around them.
And do they need prompting, or are they always quite happy to?
No, generally speaking, we engage with their teams, you know, before we do one of these events, and we share our content with them and vice versa. So yeah, I mean, they're very good conversation amplifiers. And I noticed there's another comment there about being a sustainable influencer. Your actions must back up your tweets. Absolutely. I mean, what we do again through these fora is we engage in a conversation. We will have critical questions coming in. We put those in front of the panelists on the stage. We make sure we put them on the spot. You know, it's important. You have to be transparent. You can't just you know, engage in the conversation that suits you.
Yeah. And what about you, Mary? Do you leverage the power of influencers to improve that engagement?
Do. Yeah, we do. In fact, I mean, if you even think about social media, I think it goes back to what Nathan was saying, I believe, where it's not a one-way conversation. I mean, this is truly a conversation. And so it's you know, one-to-one, if you're thinking about who you're engaging with, it's a bunch of one-to-one relationships. And at a very tactical level, if we are having that engagement, then we actually will put content into our tweets or into our Facebook, so that particular influencer or those particular influencers can find out more about what it is that they care about. So we've got that content side, but we're making sure that we're driving with our social media to a place that's going to further that conversation.
Okay, let's take another question from John Friedman from Sodexo. We talked earlier about kind of having separate Twitter handles, for instance, for specific issues. So John asks, does a separate digital presence reinforce the idea that sustainability is part of or peripheral to the actual business? John, do you want to answer?
Can I have a go at that? And actually, from our perspective, I'd like to clarify, we do have corporately a separate Twitter handle for our Creating Shared Value conversation. That's not to say that our brands, which are the principal point of contact with our end consumers, like Nescafé, KitKat, you know, they have their own handles, and they typically will have a conversation around, you know, something like the Nescafé plan, which is our engagement with coffee farmers around the world. The cocoa plan, again, it's about the cocoa that goes into the Kit Kat. Many of the consumers that are purchasing those products have a specific question about how these things apply to that product, which is what they eventually choose. By the way, they make 1.2 billion purchasing decisions every single day, so they are kind of interested.
Yeah.
But they tend to do it at that level rather than at the corporate level. The people who engage with us on the corporate level are, they tend to be the people who are more broadly interested, more broadly expert, more broadly read and learned and watching about sustainability issues.
Well, what about you, Madeleine? Is there a danger in having these kind of separate entities? I mean, it's all, the conversation's always been about embedding sustainability. Does it make sense to have these separate handles?
So at Virgin, we don't really have any separate channels. Our sustainability related content is distributed across all of the channels that we have access to. So in that way, it is central. I think that will become even more important for the group because, as I was saying earlier, we've now, in the last 12 months, adopted this new purpose statement, which should unite the entire Virgin Group in changing business for good. So for us, it is very much about putting sustainability, or you can call it a whole different number of words, right at the heart of what we do, and that should be replicated in social. And yeah, we definitely don't see social as, and I think our investment is testament to that. It's definitely not a kind of an extra thing that we do on the side. We don't even use the term corporate social responsibility because to me that's very old fashioned. So it's very much about, this is what's interesting. It's what's interesting to our audience. They respond very well to it. And then equally, like I was saying earlier as well, for us, it's not just about us. It's not just about Virgin or what Virgin Atlantic's doing or all the great stuff they're doing. Actually, it's equally just as much about what the incredible things that are happening around the world. And we see that as something that we can offer. So yeah, I don't think it should be, I certainly don't think any organisation should have 5 Twitter handles and one of them should just be sustainability, because that's not the way the world works anymore.
Sure.
No, but having said that, we've seen that when businesses do have a dedicated focus within their sort of social footprint for sustainability, providing it is embedded across sort of everything else they're talking about,
it's how they link together, isn't it?
They do work a lot better. And actually, I think, people, when they are trying to sort of navigate around brands online, on social, they expect to see dedicated kind of focused areas where they can go and engage in those kind of conversations with those businesses around different topics. You would have a customer service channel, you would have a channel that maybe is more sort of focused on marketing, you'd have something that maybe is more focused on kind of your purpose. And I think that works, and I think people expect that, and it allows them to choose how and when to interact. I think the key is, as you rightly say, is to make sure that it isn't just done within a silo. You have a focus and you have an area where you're focusing on it, but then that content is then being shared across other parts of the business.
Sure. Okay. Let's take a look at one last question, perhaps. Isn't there a risk that being a sustainable influencer on social media is just a form of greenwashing? It's easy to tweet or post good content, but your actions must back up your tweets. Nathan, do you have a view on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this actually is in some ways related to your previous question, which is how distinct do you look at a social media conversation about sustainability versus your core business or your brand or your business unit. I think for us, we in many cases for what you're referring to as sustainability, we're referring to as our business, as our bread and butter. So manufacturing the world's most efficient jet engine or the world's most efficient gas turbine or locomotive is by nature an environmental contribution, and doing things the most efficient way possible for industry is our business. So I think it's to the question, I think it's important not to take credit for that and make it sort of appear as some sort of philanthropic effort. This is about the businesses. This is about our shareholders. And also not to, I guess, greenwash, I think, is an important issue. I mean, you can't sort of be, have your business over here, but only be talking about things on the other side. So only casting attention to or light to a very small part of what you do, or a very small sort of charitable giving contribution that you put on the side of billions in revenue in an industry that maybe has challenges of its own. So I think we try to address the world's toughest problems and challenges, and those have to do with energy and things like coal, and we'll just discuss climate change and all of these really tough topics, and see how we as a business can contribute to solutions without sort of only pretending to dance over here where everything is easy and nice. So I think it's important to do both.
Okay, Gemma,
Yeah,
what's
you know,
your view on this?
Well, I think that it depends what you see as the value of looking at influencers. I mean, when we identify influential people for the brands and businesses we work with to connect with, we're looking at people who are genuinely interested in the different subject areas, have significant social footprints of their own and audiences of their own that listen to them, that can engage with them. And the reason we find these people for the businesses that we work with is because we want them to help really create change on behalf and in collaboration with those businesses. So it isn't greenwashing, it is actually about making real change, sustainable change happen. And equally, that's the same. It's the same with businesses that we're working with when we're trying to help them to become influential. It's about helping them to genuinely impact the audiences, work with the audiences, collaborate with them, and make change happen, and allow their progress to be something that is kind of real and tangible. So I think it's how you kind of perceive that topic, really.
Sure. Okay. I'm conscious of time. We are coming towards the end of our time, and we could go on all day, I'm sure. I wonder whether each of our panelists might wrap things up with maybe a tweet-like sentence that kind of explains or describes the tangible value of their social when it comes to engaging around sustainability issues. Who wants to go first on that one? Just a very simple sentence to wrap things up. Madeleine, go.
I'm just going to plunge in.
Good for you. Good for you.
It yet. I would say from a Virgin perspective, I think social media and content allows us to, the bottom line is, sorry, I'm just not tweeting anymore.
It's not 140
sorry, I'll start again. Social media and content allows us to join our audiences in talking and taking action on the issues that they care about.
Good. John?
So just a bit of advice, be straightforward and clear, share honest, interesting information clearly, listen to what the reaction is, see how people react, and then learn from there.
Good. Nathan?
Define your audience and measure the results.
And Mary, lastly.
Be authentic, develop trust, and create content that they care most about.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, we are going to have to wrap things up for this session. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for fascinating insights, lots of tips, lots of advice for us all to take away. And it's clear that social media is a complex business. There's a lot of challenges to overcome, but I think what's become clear from this discussion and from looking at the index and some of the key findings is that there's lots of value attached to it if you get it right. So I urge you all to rush off and digest the index, look at the key findings. There's loads of really valuable stuff in there, so do that. And also, these guys at Salterbaxter now have, tons of data, lots of insights, so use them. I'm sure they'll, if you're interested, do follow up afterwards. I know we didn't get through all of your questions today, but thank you so much for sending so many great questions into us. The team at Salterbaxter here will endeavour to get back to you in due course, so don't worry about that. And lastly, thank you for tuning in. And from all of us here in London, in New York, in Seattle, goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.